special series, Road to $5 trillion economy, we regularly bring you various voices on what India needs to do to reach this ambitious target by 2024, as has been the stated intent of this government. Today, I have with me a very special speaker, a renowned and respected voice on the Indian economy, Mr. Rathin Roy, who is director at NIPFP and till recently was a part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Mr. Roy, thank you for speaking with us. I'm also speaking to you at a time which is particularly bad for the Indian economy. We all know we're in the middle of a slowdown. Are we in a position that is that bad? What is your broad assessment of where we are headed?
Well, the Indian economy is not growing as fast as people expected it to, and that is why people are saying it's a slowdown. It's not an economic collapse by any means. Growth is not just positive. That's the first benchmark. A recession is when you have negative growth or growth shrinks, the economy shrinks. That's not happening. Growth still outpaces population growth, which means per capita income is rising. It is just that the rates of growth that we were expecting to see are not happening, and more worrying, the leading indicators of the Indian economy, the areas that gave us growth in the past, those areas are actually seeing recessions, slowdowns, turnarounds. And that is what is worrying, I think, many people.
Question about, reviewing the reforms that we have unrolled so far. A lot of them have focused on increasing liquidity in the markets. Once again, you've seen the RBI consistently cutting rates. You've seen, recapitalization of public sector banks. You've seen some kind of a breather for NBFCs, etc. Do you think that the direction has been right so far in terms of tackling what the crux of the problem is?
Let me split up your statement into two separate sentences. I think the reforms that have been undertaken are important and necessary. I like them. But if you've been following what I've been writing, when you said crux, I think the crux of this slowdown is that it signals that the Indian economy has a structural demand problem. And there's a lot that all players in the Indian economy will have to do to address that structural demand problem, which cannot be done using fiscal or monetary policy alone. What can be done using monetary policy is being done, perhaps more could be done. What can be done to fix the financial system is being done, and I'm sure more will be done going forward. What can be done to alleviate misinterpretations of policy announcements has been done quite well. What can be done in sectors which are suffering, such as housing, particularly low-cost housing, has been done, and I'm sure more will come. But the fact that the leading indicators of the Indian economy are based on the consumption of the top 150 million is not going away. So we will have to take steps, structural reforms to address that. That has to do with the resilience and stability and magnitude of growth of the Indian economy. Those steps still need to come. Now, these steps will take time. Some of the things we needed to do to take these steps, for example, in the housing market we have done. There's a distinct shift in emphasis now to affordable housing. That's a good thing. The doubling farmers' income journey is a worthwhile one to walk. We now need to deal with the fact that we are unable to take advantage of our massive medium to low price textile markets, which are largely going away to Bangladesh and Vietnam. We need to fix that. We need to fix our health and education models so that affordable health and education contribute to GDP growth. We need to fix public administration. So these are the kinds of structural reforms that we will need to do, in my view, to end not just this slowdown, but also the deeper structural causes this slowdown signals. That crux has not yet been addressed. But measures to address the slowdown that are possible in the immediate term and that can be expected to have a short-term impact are obviously well underway. And that's a good thing.
One of the measures in the short to medium term that people have been talking about to address the demand side constraints is something to the effect of cutting down personal income taxes, find ways to put more money in people's hands before the broader reforms kick in and income growth takes place. Do you think there is any such sort of formula that exists right now to improve at least the demand side constraints in the short to medium term?
You know, it's only people who watch TV, especially English TV, who think that demand side constraints are about their own pockets. This is a country of 1.2 billion people, a fraction of whom pay personal income tax. And there is absolutely no guarantee that if I slash their income taxes, they will either not basically increase their consumption or just increase savings, or even worse, start buying more imported stuff which they have got quite addicted to. I cannot give you a guarantee that they will spend it on things the Indian economy produces, because they want fine Italian kitchens, they want to educate their children abroad, right? They want imported cosmetics, they want to eat sushi. So whose personal income tax are you going to cut? I think much more important, as I said in my column in the Business Channel this morning, is to have an incomes policy where people who are earning the minimum wage or slightly above that, we are able to make sure that they are able to buy goods at affordable prices. You can, it is true, through taxation impact consumer demand of these people, the Aam Aadmi, who are the people who produce at home and consume at home. You can do that by reducing indirect taxes. That moderation, the GST has already taken place, but there are limits to that, given its importance as a source of government revenue. You do not want to be seeing GST coming down and therefore the government being unable to provide income support or to deliver education or to deliver health or other public goods, right? So there's a limit to which you can use tax policy as an instrument to boost aggregate demand, unless you think that a rise in luxury-led consumption,
Yes.
you know, a lot of which will be discretionary imports as a consequence of income tax cuts is going to lift this economy. I simply think that is not true. That's not going to happen.
Well, perhaps that's why it is one of those things, like you said, restricted to television channels and some perhaps op-ed columns. But then how do you increase income in the hands of the Aam Aadmi, as you put it? You've seen agricultural subsidies, MSP prices, the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana adding some income in the hands of this sector, but it seems woefully inadequate. Do you think there is now an argument for more agricultural support or rural India support?
There is an argument for improving productivity and incomes in agriculture, which involves making investments in agriculture that help the farming business to grow, as opposed to making food output, food grain output, or crop output grow. The value that the farmer gets must grow, and that involves making policy changes that don't involve actually spending money. A number of things that you need to do to put money in the pockets of the Aam Aadmi do not involve spending money. Let me give you another example, education. Because we have a bad public education system, people are spending out of pocket hugely on private education and getting very little productive reward for it. The same is true of health. So if you improve the quality of public service delivery, that doesn't involve spending more money. That involves spending better and more effectively. You will be putting money in the pockets of the Aam Aadmi, because the Aam Aadmi will then get education for less and will have more left over to spend on other things. That will increase growth. That will also increase employment, because education, health, textiles, agriculture, housing, low cost, affordable housing, all these are employment jobful areas. So basically structural means medium term means government and industry and other stakeholders will have to work together to make sure that 3 years later, when Tamanna and Rathin are sitting in the studio, we talk about the leading indicators of the Indian economy, and we talk about food, we talk about cotton, we talk about housing, that is affordable housing, we talk about textiles, we talk about health, we talk about education as being the drivers of Indian growth. That we are not doing today. And that is what has got to change. It's a much more serious problem than a standard cyclical recession.
Absolutely. I just want to focus a little more on the word reforms and the whole process of reforms. Because every measure and every announcement that the government makes right now is dubbed as a reform. Often, by television channels as well. But there is also a view that with the kind of impressive, massive mandate that this government has, there is a lot more that can be done. Do you think that there is a hesitation of the political outcome of some of these steps, whether they're on labor reforms, whether they're land reforms and other such picky, touchy issues, sensitive issues?
I don't think there is as much a political hesitation as an executive inability to design, scope and execute these reforms. So actually the first reform we need, which every government has ignored and we are paying the price now, indeed we have been paying it for 10 years, is that our administrative executive capacity, our administrative institutions, in the economic sphere in particular, are not fit for purpose. Those institutions need to be made fit for purpose, and then these reforms need to be designed, executed, and implemented in the medium term. It has no immediate political benefit in terms of elections, but it has no, if the execution and design is good, it has no immediate political costs. What has perhaps happened is that because of poor execution of GST and other such measures, the political authorities now are worried that their political execution capability that they have in their hands, is so unfit for purpose that there could be unpredictable and possibly negative electoral consequences. That's quite possible. But if they are, you get the executive administration that you shape and the incentives you give them. So if you are unable to increase the efficiency of public service delivery, if you are unable to get the civil service to work towards genuine reform and not just event management, which they will if you demand it, and if you are uneasy, or if people who wish to tell you the truth are uneasy about doing so for fear of retribution, if you are an insecure government, you will not get executive capability. So the urgent task before government, I see very positive steps happening on this front, by the way, is to start thinking outside the box, start improving executive capability, talk to the wider economic ecosystem. The government is not the economy. See how they can play their part in improving executive capability and go and do it. We have a structural problem on the demand side, but a huge part of the structural problem is we are a very expensive place to do business, and therefore productivity is very low. Our credibility is low. You are sitting in Bombay, I am from Bombay, I am saying this today to the Maharashtra government. I do not believe you when you say you will open Mumbai airport on the day you said you would. I know now that you will take at least a year longer than you said you would. And for event management purposes, you may, within quotes, open that airport on the day you say or shortly therefore, but in practice you will not do it, you will not complete and finish on time, and that is the track record of government implementation, even in something as straightforward as airports. Forget complex systems like health and education. This has got to change for productivity to improve. Focusing on indicators like doing business is relatively easy. I know what to do if I want to improve ranks on an indicator, but to genuinely improve ease of doing business requires executive action and reforms of a level which no government to date has seen fit to implement, including from 1991. Therefore, the low-hanging fruit have been harvested. And therefore, the slowdown is also structural in the sense that I can temporarily ameliorate it using macroeconomic policy instruments. But the structural causes will not reverse unless these tough decisions are taken. There are no political costs to them if the decisions are implemented effectively and well. Yes, there are political costs to them if implementation is ramshackle. And that I think the government should legitimately fear, but the solution lies within as much as the fear does.
I must ask you, Mr. Roy, and I don't know if you're going to like answering this question, but I must ask you, because you have been part of the system. Is there a capability within government to listen to critique and advice that does not echo their own thinking? Or is there a tendency to shut out voices that do not necessarily echo what they believe to be right?
You will have to ask the people who are doing the listening. I think the job of those who are speaking, of experts or people who have a view on the question such as me, is to express it. And take-up happens in many ways. Take-up can happen with a lag, take-up can happen partially, take-up can happen in some quarters. Public policy is a complex business. So I will not be able to judge, whether the path that I'm saying that we need to walk on, whether there's widespread acceptance and a sort of solid putting our shoulders together to walk on that path. Probably not. But are there people who are listening? I think yes. Are there people who are seized of the problem? I think yes. Are there people who are willing to work towards a solution? I think certainly so. But we need to raise that scale a bit. It's not about individuals here or listening to individuals or willingness or unwillingness. We need to raise that scale a bit, and that requires a little bit of self-confidence and a little bit of collaborative work and a little bit of leap of faith, which I'm confident will come in the coming months.
Absolutely, but I am asking you in the context of your own experience, being part of PMEAC, and what was your sense in that advisory body how well these suggestions are going down, because then that would get us a sense of possible implementability.
It would be extremely unwise, I can tell you as a professional economist, to judge from one data point, that is me. But for the record, I can say that I never hesitated to give advice. When I did give advice, often unsolicited, I know that it was accepted and there was no pushback at me as to why I gave that advice. What happened to that advice, I do not know, because that is not how government policy works. But I would like to think that it influenced at least some of the policy actions of the previous regime. And some of the advice was clearly not taken. There was a differing view on it. And that is how it works. No one is omnipotent. So you give the advice you think you ought to. Some of it is taken, some of it is not. What is taken, what is not, depends on circumstances, individuals, personalities. And that is how government works. No one is, too big to be subordinated to this process. And those who feel that, who personalize these things too much, I think are either being facetious or seem to take a far more sort of self-important view of themselves than working in a complex system like, public policy in India should warrant.
Absolutely. Let me come to the broader picture, Mr. Roy, and the elephant in the room always when we speak about reform is, the whole balancing act with the fiscal deficit. That has also made it to part of the commentary of, what some agencies have talked about, whether most people are clear, we will not touch 3.3, will we go up to 3.7? Is it important to stick to that target when you're in the middle of a slowdown? Do you think that some of these concerns are relevant?
If you were to bring the fiscal deficit down to 3.5% of GDP, you would be running a contractionary fiscal policy. Given the fact that, and I'm being the most conservative on this, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India has been far more ebullient. I don't think that institution is entirely right. But I certainly do think that we are already borrowing at least 1% more for general government than has been reported in the fiscal deficit numbers. So even if you take my very modest estimate, we are already at a fiscal deficit of 4.3. So anything sub 3.5 will be a major fiscal contraction. I would not advise that in these circumstances. All I would request is whatever mixture of off-budget and on-budget borrowing one has, one does not further exceed it. That itself will be a very difficult thing to do, given the fact that the government has seen fit, in their best judgment, to provide certain tax cuts, given the fact that certain amounts, very modest amounts, of resources have had to be put at the disposal of the banking system, etc. And given the fact that the only discernibly different source of revenue that has come into the government's books is the slightly elevated RBI dividend. Nothing else has come in. It is also likely, given the fact that GDP has slowed down, that even if the tax GDP ratio is maintained, there will actually be less money that government will have in rupees crores compared to what it expected to have last year. So already the fiscal situation is constrained. So I would not advocate the general government, the fiscal deficit of the general central government measured as total fiscal deficit, but what I consider such as FCI, and it's been reported in the budget as off budget. Okay, it's been reported in the budget as off budget to be unambiguously off budget borrowings by the government of India, as reported in the revenue statement, as reported in the medium term fiscal policy statement. I would not view it wise to exceed that number, which I put at about 4.3% of GDP.
Yeah, but how will we know?
On budget and off budget.
But how will we know? Because what you're indicating is data credibility.
I'm not indicating data credibility at all. I'm saying that if you look at the budget very carefully, I've written about this complex fixation on TV. So you have this on budget number. Then in the budget itself, they say that there are certain other borrowings of the government of India, which will not be counted as part of the fiscal deficit. If you add those two, my judgment is you go up above 4%, 4.2, 4.3. If you read the CAG's report for last year, he thinks it's much higher, but leave that. I'm the most conservative on this. So if you take that total number, I'm saying stick within that, because you might have things moving on budget to off budget to on budget, fine. But stick to that number in total. That's what matters for the economy, not some headline target. It's a bit like saying that, I want to achieve a $5 trillion economy. I'll achieve it for you if you can let me appreciate the dollar to 30. But that was not the spirit behind the Prime Minister saying $5 trillion economy. No? So in the same way, what is that issue here? The issue is the total amount of money the government is borrowing to finance its expenditure. Okay? And what we want is that total borrowing as a sum of GDP not to go above 4.3%. That is what I would like to see.
You've led me perfectly to my last question, actually. Do you think $5 trillion by 2024 for the size of India's GDP is achievable? And are we on our track to achieve this target despite the hit that we see right now in the economy in 2019?
It is achievable. I don't understand what you mean by on track, because I'm not a communist. I don't think of the country as some lumbering railway train that slows down or speeds up at the whims of the engine driver moving the lever. Okay. From here to 24 is a long way. Many things may happen. There are many things we could do to make sure that we are more likely to be closer to that number in 2024 than unlikely. There are many things we can do that may make us more unlikely. There are things that we could do which would be fantastic, which would actually help us not just achieve that, but achieve the inclusive way, such as getting industries into the north of India, such as import substituting in textiles, such as fixing the public service delivery quality and cost of public service delivery, particularly health and education. If we did all these things, if we had an inclusive pattern of development, I think our probability of hitting $5 trillion is higher. There are many things that could throw us off track. It could be exogenous, it could be endogenous, in which case our ability to achieve 5 trillion will be lower. So I think the spirit of this 5 trillion number, if you're not a communist, is to say it's possible for the Indian economy, the way it is going now, to be substantially bigger by 2024. We need to make sure that it keeps that level of promise to the extent we can, given exogenous circumstances and given things we know that we can do internally to make us that substantially bigger and more inclusive economy more likely in 2024 than not.
Thank you so much. Rathin Roy there, talking about India's road to $5 trillion, not going, the way communists do, was his closing comment. But lovely chatting with you, Rathin Roy, on the state of the economy as it stands today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.